I've studied men who rose from nothing to greatness, and I've studied those who had everything, yet lost it all. What separates them is never just intelligence or opportunity, it's fear, or more precisely, how they handle it. Fear, my friend, is the silent enemy. It creeps in through doubt, hesitation, and uncertainty. But I've learned how to defeat it forever, and I'll show you how. Fear is subtle. It whispers when you should roar. It slows your feet when you were born to run. You won't always recognize it, because it wears disguises: procrastination, perfectionism, self-doubt. But I call it by its real name. And once you name a thing, you take its power. So the first step in destroying fear is becoming aware of its voice. Quiet, persistent, lying. When I was unknown, broke, uncertain, I heard that voice often. It told me I wasn't enough, that I'd fail, that people would laugh. But I didn't shout back. I didn't argue. I got quiet. And in that silence, I asked myself one question. What would I do right now if I had no fear? That one question unlocked doors fear tried to keep closed. Ask it often. Most people think fear is loud, but it's the silence where it lives. It's in the pauses between action and excuse. That's why my method is silent, because real courage doesn't come from noise. It comes from alignment. I destroyed fear not by fighting it, but by outgrowing it. When I became bigger than my fear, it stopped having a voice that mattered. Fear thrives in imagination. It invents worst-case scenarios that never arrive. So I used the same imagination it hijacked and pointed it in a new direction. I visualized courage, success, purpose. I imagined the version of me who had already overcome. And slowly, that image became stronger than the fear that once paralyzed me. Action silences fear. Not because action is louder, but because it creates proof. Every time I acted in spite of fear, I gathered evidence that I was stronger than it. That evidence became confidence. That confidence became identity. Fear can't argue with results, so I didn't try to feel brave. I simply moved. And that movement became my method. I never waited to be fearless. I acted while afraid. I spoke through the shaking. I walked into uncertainty as if it were my stage. And slowly, fear lost its grip. Because I stopped treating it like a signal to stop and started treating it like a sign to start. That's how leaders are born, not in comfort, but in the decision to walk anyway. Now write this in the comments. I act in spite of fear. Say it like a declaration, like a vow, because from this moment forward, you'll no longer wait for fear to leave. You'll walk with it until it can't keep up. This is your shift. This is your new identity. You don't destroy fear with force. You destroy it with decision. When you move forward while fear begs you to retreat, you prove something sacred to your soul, that you're in charge now. That voice inside you, doubtful, hesitant, shrinking, it's just an echo of your past, not your potential. I stopped listening to the echoes and started creating new ones. I spoke victory, moved with purpose, and fear grew quiet. I learned to embrace silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted to hear myself think. The world shouts fear all day long. But in the quiet, I could remember who I was, what I stood for, what I was building. Silence became my reset button. It allowed me to return to the truth, that fear is temporary, but purpose is eternal. Every time I stepped forward, fear stepped back. Not because it vanished, but because it couldn't compete with momentum. Movement weakens fear, so I made it my mission to stay in motion. I didn't sprint, I didn't panic. I simply moved, one small step at a time. And step by step, I became someone fear could no longer influence. Fear hates clarity. That's why I sharpened my vision. I got specific about what I wanted, why I wanted it, and what I was willing to do to get it. The more clear I became, the less room fear had to speak. Clarity is a shield. When you know where you're going, distractions lose power. Fear thrives in confusion, but dies in clarity. Fear taught me something powerful. It only shows up when you're headed in the right direction. So now I welcome its presence, not as a threat, but as a compass. When fear whispers, "Don't," I lean in. That whisper is proof I'm on the edge of growth. I don't run from it, I walk through it. That's how I built strength from struggle. You won't destroy fear by overthinking. You'll destroy it by over-deciding. Decide who you are. Decide what you want. Decide that fear no longer gets to vote. I made fear a passenger, not a driver. It could ride, but it could never touch the wheel. And with that decision, I took back the authority I had unknowingly surrendered. You must become more obsessed with your future than you are afraid of your failure. That's what I did. I obsessed over the vision. I wrote it, repeated it, breathed it. And fear? It couldn't compete. It became background noise to my mission. Because when you're consumed by purpose, fear becomes irrelevant. It can't stay where you're focused. Now pause and comment. I move through fear with purpose. Make it public. Make it personal. Let it mark this moment as the one where you stopped waiting and started owning your journey. You are no longer the one who runs from fear. You are the one who keeps moving anyway. That's the difference that changes everything. I didn't fight fear with aggression. I starved it with consistency. I showed up to my vision daily. I built routines around courage. I took small steps with big intention. And day by day, fear had less to feed on. It lives on uncertainty, hesitation, and indecision. But when you live with clarity, courage, and repetition, fear can't survive the pressure. Most people think courage feels like a roar, but I've found it often feels like a whisper. A soft yes to the next step. A quiet keep going when you want to stop. That's where fear loses. It doesn't take grand gestures. It takes consistent declarations. And I made mine every day, even if my voice trembled. Especially then. Fear uses imagination to create prisons. But imagination was never meant for chains. It was meant for vision. I flipped the script. I imagined my future self, bold, focused, fulfilled. I visualized success in detail. I walked through the victory in my mind until it felt familiar. And that familiarity weakened fear's grip on my decisions. I didn't hide from fear, I exposed it. I wrote it down. I spoke it aloud. I examined it without shame. Because what you conceal will control you. But what you confront, you can transform. Once I saw fear for what it was, a thief of dreams, I refused to let it steal from me again. I chose to reclaim every room it once entered. One of the greatest lies fear tells is, what if you fail? But I answered it with a better question. What if I succeed? What if everything I dream is waiting just beyond this fear? That question lit a fire in me. It rewired my focus. And from that day forward, I stopped being afraid of failure and started being afraid of missing my potential. Your words shape your reality, so I trained my language to reflect strength. No more, I hope, I'm trying, or maybe. I said, I'm doing, I'm building, I'm becoming. Words reprogram the nervous system. Speak power, and fear fades. I didn't fake confidence. I repeated truth until it drowned out lies, and that truth became my foundation. Fear doesn't respond to logic, it responds to energy. And when I walked with conviction, even in uncertainty, fear stepped aside. People think the fearless are born brave, but I was scared too. The difference? I moved anyway. That movement taught my body, my mind, my spirit. We don't live by fear. We live by faith, by vision, by leadership. Now comment below. I speak power, not fear. Say it out loud if you have to. This is your reprogramming. The moment you declare what you stand for and silence the voice that once led your life. Every time you say those words, you're planting confidence where fear used to grow. And with time, you'll harvest courage. I created a rule for myself. Fear doesn't get the final word. When it speaks, I listen. But I don't obey. I evaluate. I ask, is this fear protecting me or limiting me? And most times it's limitation disguised as logic. So I choose again. I choose faith. I choose forward. And by choosing often enough, I became someone who fear no longer recognized. There were moments when fear tried to sound like reason. Be realistic, it said. Don't get your hopes up. But I answered back with vision. I was not built for mediocrity. I was not made for safety. I was called to create, to grow, to lead. That declaration became a shield. And every time fear knocked, I reminded it who owned the house. I also learned to separate fact from feeling. Fear is a feeling. It isn't always fact. It can't predict the future. It doesn't know your power. So I stopped treating fear like a prophecy and started treating it like a test. Every time it showed up, I asked, what is this fear trying to protect me from? And what truth is stronger than it? When you face fear and keep moving, you build proof. And proof builds confidence. Not fake confidence, but earned certainty. I earned mine. I showed up when it was uncomfortable. I acted when it was easier to shrink. And that repetition of courage became identity. I didn't just feel brave, I became someone who walks in power daily. One of the most powerful tools I used was stillness. In stillness, fear gets exposed. In silence, truth gets louder. I didn't always need motivation. I needed alignment. I needed to sit with my fear, not to agree with it, but to understand it. And once I understood it, I saw it clearly. Fear was never truth. It was just noise. You don't have to eliminate fear to move. You only need to interrupt it. So I developed a habit. Whenever fear spoke, I responded with movement. A decision, a declaration, a step. That interruption created space for confidence, and that space became my advantage. I didn't outthink fear, I outmoved it, and the movement made all the difference. Discipline destroyed fear faster than motivation ever could. I didn't wait to feel ready. I set a standard. I said, I act regardless of emotion. I lead regardless of fear. And that standard rewired my nervous system. Discipline built a path where fear once stood in the way, and the more I followed it, the smaller fear became. Comment this now. I choose discipline over doubt. Say it again and again. Write it in the comments to anchor it in your identity. Because once discipline takes the lead, fear becomes irrelevant. You don't need to eliminate fear. You just need to become too focused to be controlled by it. That's where your next level lives. I began to notice something profound. When I focused on service instead of self, fear faded. Fear thrives in selfishness, in worrying what others will think, in obsessing over failure. But when I asked, who can I help with this gift? Fear lost its power. Purpose silenced fear. Because fear cannot survive where love and service lead the way. Your body reacts to what your mind believes. So I trained my mind to speak truth. I said, I am capable. I am calm. I am called. I repeated those truths until they reached my nervous system. Fear lives in the body too, not just the mind. But the body will listen to the voice you use most, and I made sure my voice spoke life. I stopped letting fear trick me into waiting for the right time, waiting to feel ready, waiting for permission. But fear thrives in waiting. So I broke the cycle. I decided now was enough. Who I am now, what I have now. That decision broke the spell fear had over my future. I wasn't waiting anymore, I was walking. There is no perfect moment. There is only this one. Fear wants you to believe you need more time, but I realized the most powerful people act while others are preparing. I didn't have all the answers, I didn't have a guarantee, but I had a decision, and decision was enough. That's how I destroyed fear, by refusing to wait for ideal. I redefined fear not as a problem, but as a signal. A signal that growth is near. A sign that comfort is being challenged. And if I moved through that discomfort, I'd expand. So I embraced the signal. I let fear tell me where to go, not to retreat, but to rise. And in that rising, I found parts of myself fear had tried to keep hidden. Fear didn't disappear overnight, but I got stronger each day. I noticed the moments when it tried to return, and I responded differently. With clarity, with breath, with truth. That's growth. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of power. And the more I spoke that power, the more my world aligned with it. Your environment either feeds fear or starves it. So I became intentional about what I listened to, who I surrounded myself with, and what I allowed into my mind. I chose voices that built me, ideas that stretched me, people that called me higher. Fear has less room to live when your environment is built on vision. Now declare this in the comments. I act without waiting. That's your power. That's your edge. That's the identity you're stepping into. No more hesitation, no more hiding. The next version of you doesn't wait for conditions to be perfect. They create momentum now. That's how fear is destroyed, through present tense action. Every time I chose action over anxiety, I weakened fear's foundation. It may have still knocked, but I stopped opening the door. I had things to build, a life to live. Purpose doesn't allow space for prolonged hesitation, and the more I chose movement, the less room fear had to operate. I wasn't fearless, I was focused, and that was enough. I replaced fear with structure, morning routines, focus blocks, evening reflection. Fear thrives in disorder. But when I added order to my days, fear had fewer cracks to slip through. Discipline isn't about pressure, it's about peace. I built systems that kept me steady when emotion tried to take the wheel, and fear couldn't keep up. Fear often disguised itself as logic. Be careful, it would say. Don't risk it. But I looked at results. Playing safe kept me stuck. Boldness brought growth. So I listened, but I didn't obey. Logic rooted in fear isn't wisdom, it's sabotage. And I became skilled at knowing the difference. I chose vision, and vision always demanded movement. I didn't need to know how everything would work. I just needed to trust the next step. Fear overwhelmed me when I tried to control the whole staircase. But courage? Courage asked only for the next foot forward. That shift in perspective freed me. I didn't need certainty, I needed momentum, and one step always led to another. Faith became my secret weapon. Faith in myself, faith in the process, faith in the unseen. Fear thrives when faith is absent, so I filled the gap with belief. Not blind belief, but earned trust. I had shown up enough times to know I wouldn't break. That knowing gave me peace, and peace gave me power. That's what made fear irrelevant. I stopped letting fear narrate my story. I took the pen back. I wrote new pages with my actions. Every choice, every step, every word, I made them count. Fear used to write my endings. Now I write them myself. And the ending always leads to growth, to expansion, to becoming. Fear had a chapter, but it never got to write my conclusion. You want to kill fear? Start moving toward the very thing it guards. That idea you've been afraid to start, that conversation you've avoided, that risk you've delayed. On the other side of that fear is the life you keep imagining, and the moment you walk toward it, fear shrinks. It always looks big until you step through. I began to notice that fear and excitement feel the same in the body. The only difference is the label we give it. So I stopped calling it fear. I called it readiness, preparation, expansion. That simple shift turned dread into direction. Now, when the feeling comes, I don't retreat, I lean in. Because what once scared me now signals growth. I started using my breath as a reset. In moments where fear crept in, I didn't panic. I paused. I breathed deeply. I remembered, fear is a reaction, not a ruler, and I choose who rules me. Breath became my anchor. With every inhale, I grounded myself in power. With every exhale, I released old stories, and fear had no space to settle. You won't outthink fear. You have to out-experience it. Take action, see the results, feel the power in following through. That's how fear gets smaller, not with more thought, but with more evidence. Evidence that you're capable, that you're consistent, that you do hard things anyway. Fear can't argue with follow-through. The mind is like a garden. Fear is a weed. If you don't pull it, it spreads. But I didn't just pull fear. I planted truth. I repeated affirmations that aligned with my vision. I am ready. I am guided. I am disciplined. I watered those truths every morning, and soon fear had no room to grow. My garden was too full of purpose. I stopped asking, what if it goes wrong? And started asking, what if it works? That question shifted everything, because fear lives in the worst-case scenario, but faith thrives in vision. And I made it my mission to focus on what could go right. That shift wasn't just mindset, it was strategy, a new internal compass. Fear didn't like my new questions. It preferred silence, assumption, worry. But I started questioning fear itself. Who told me that? What story am I believing? What would I do if I didn't feel afraid? Those questions opened new paths fear never wanted me to find. But once I walked them, I never looked back. Sometimes fear tries to return dressed as comfort, but I recognize it now. Comfort without growth is just disguised decay. So I replaced comfort with clarity. I don't need ease, I need expansion. And expansion is never fear-free. But it's worth it. Every time I grew, I had to leave something safe behind. That's the price of becoming. Now declare this in the comments. Growth matters more than comfort. Let it sink into your bones. Because from this moment forward, you no longer chase ease, you chase evolution. And fear has no place in a life dedicated to progress. You're not just escaping fear, you're walking into the future. I trained my subconscious by repetition, not once, not weekly, but daily. I didn't wait for motivation to arrive, I installed it. I am safe, I am strong, I am steady. These phrases weren't just words, they were bricks. And I laid them every day until the foundation beneath me was unshakable. Fear couldn't crack what I had built with discipline. I stopped negotiating with fear. No more debates in my head, no more, maybe later. When fear spoke, I didn't answer, I acted. That shift changed everything. Fear loves dialogue, because dialogue delays decisions. But I wasn't here to delay, I was here to dominate. And decisive action was how I ended the discussion. I looked back one day and realized most of the things I feared never happened. Fear had tricked me. It had made small problems feel like monsters. But monsters shrink when you turn on the light. And the light is truth, experience, movement. That's when I knew. Fear was never the problem, my agreement with it was. I chose to break that agreement. I revoked fear's permission to lead. I no longer gave it my time, my voice, or my plans. And once I broke the contract, something beautiful happened. My future stopped shrinking. It expanded. I created space for vision, for boldness, for life. And fear, it became a memory instead of a master. I made peace with discomfort, because growth lives there. And once you make peace with the process, fear has nothing to bargain with. You stop flinching. You stop resisting. You start embracing what most people avoid. And that embrace becomes your edge. I didn't just tolerate discomfort. I trained in it, and it trained me back. Fear taught me who I wasn't and who I could become. It showed me my edges, my insecurities, my stories. But instead of avoiding them, I studied them. I listened, and then I rewrote them. I replaced fear with identity, not someone else's, but mine. The version of me I had always sensed, buried beneath hesitation. When you walk through fear enough times, it gets familiar. Not easy, but familiar. You stop seeing it as a threat and start seeing it as an invitation to step up, to become, to lead. And I answered that invitation again and again, until one day, fear knocked, and I didn't even hear it. I had outgrown its frequency. Now pause and type this in the comments. I've broken my agreement with fear. That's your declaration. That's your new identity. You no longer partner with hesitation. You don't bargain with doubt. You walk boldly, fully awake, fully alive. This is your new way of living, and fear doesn't belong here anymore. I realized fear was just a habit, a well-practiced response. And like any habit, it could be broken through new patterns, new language, new movement. So I built a new habit, boldness. I rehearsed courage. I installed confidence, not overnight, but every day. And slowly my reflex changed. Fear knocked, and I answered with power. Every time I followed through, even when afraid, I sent a message to my future. You can trust me. That's what kills fear, consistency. Not the big wins, but the quiet decisions. The ones no one sees. The ones that rewrite identity. And my identity changed because I refused to let fear dictate my pattern. I set the tone now. There's a version of you waiting. Not down the road, but right now, beneath fear. And the only thing standing between you and that version is a decision. Not a perfect plan, just a bold decision to move, to walk anyway, to speak up, to act. I made that decision once, and it became a lifestyle, a way of showing up to every moment. I stopped asking for less fear and started asking for more faith. Fear shrinks vision, faith expands it. So I fed the part of me I wanted to grow. I listened to truth. I read powerful words. I reflected in silence. I prayed. I walked. And that walk became strength. Not loud strength, but deep. Rooted. The kind that doesn't shake when fear returns. You don't need a miracle to destroy fear. You need momentum. A conversation you've been avoiding. A decision you've been delaying. That one thing you keep putting off. Do it. Move. Not because it's easy, but because it's who you are now. Action isn't just how you get results. It's how you build identity. Identity that fear can't survive. When fear tried to come back, I didn't resist. I recentered. I came back to truth. I remembered who I was. I returned to my vision. Fear needs chaos to survive. So I built peace, structure, alignment. I made my inner world so clear that fear had nowhere to hide. And the clearer I got, the faster fear faded into background noise. I took responsibility for my emotions. Fear no longer became just how I feel. It became a signal, a choice. And once it was a choice, I was free. Because I had options now, I could respond, redirect, realign. That shift gave me power. I wasn't at the mercy of my feelings. I was the author of my focus. And that focus rewrote everything. Now comment this to anchor your identity. I'm no longer available for fear. That's your new standard, a boundary, a line in the sand. You don't entertain fear because you're too aligned with purpose, too committed to progress, too focused on what's ahead. Fear may try, but you won't be there to receive it anymore. Fear used to slow me down. Now it speeds me up. Because when I feel fear, I know I've found the edge, the line between comfort and calling. And I don't pause there anymore. I push, I lean in, I move. That reframe changed everything. Fear became a signal, not to stop, but to rise. And rising became the rhythm of my life. I stopped needing guarantees. That was fear's game, convincing me I had to be certain before I moved. But life doesn't reward certainty. It rewards courage. I stopped waiting to feel ready. I decided to be ready. Right now. In this moment. With what I had. That shift made me dangerous. Because fear couldn't delay me anymore. Confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep going in its presence. I walked with shaky hands. I spoke through a trembling voice. And I still showed up. Again and again. And over time, the shaking stopped. Because I had taught my body, my mind, my identity, this is who we are now, and fear had no place in that decision. I made peace with rejection, because fear of rejection kept me from trying. But I reframed it. Rejection wasn't failure, it was redirection. It was refinement. It was proof that I was moving. And the more I moved, the more confident I became. Not because I always won, but because I never stopped. That's how fear lost its power. Fear will never fully disappear, but it will lose influence. The more you act, the more your brain rewires. You become familiar with risk, comfortable with tension, at home in uncertainty. And that familiarity creates freedom. Freedom to speak, to build, to lead. I didn't eliminate fear. I simply outgrew its volume. Your future is allergic to fear. It doesn't thrive in hesitation. It needs boldness. And boldness isn't natural. It's trained. I trained mine through decision, through action, through speaking what I believed until I became it. You don't become fearless by chance. You become fearless by choice, one aligned choice at a time. My internal language changed everything. I no longer said, "What if I mess up?" I said, "What if I rise?" I didn't say, "This is too much." I said, "This is preparing me." My vocabulary shifted my reality. Fear had no room in the presence of clarity, and clarity came when I spoke like someone who trusted their mission. Now speak your shift in the comments. I choose boldness, not fear. Let it echo in your mind. Let it become a mantra. Fear used to run the conversation. Now you do. And your voice is clear, focused, rooted in action. This is no longer a battle. It's a becoming, and boldness is your new normal. I trained my attention. Fear feeds on scattered focus. It grows when your mind jumps from doubt to doubt. So I got still. I chose one thought, one goal, one action, and I stayed there. That stillness starved fear, because where attention goes, emotion flows, and I wasn't giving fear my attention anymore. I gave it to purpose. There is no future in fear, only delay, only cycles, only repetition of regret. So I stepped into the unknown, not with full knowledge, but with full commitment. I trusted the process. I trusted my strength, and that trust became transformation. Fear didn't leave because I was lucky. It left because I no longer fed it. I understood that fear is contagious. If you surround yourself with fearful people, you will speak their language. So I changed my environment. I surrounded myself with belief, with vision, with movement. I curated my inputs, and the voices I heard the most became the voices inside me. That's how I replaced fear with fire. I didn't let fear take up space in my schedule. If I said I'd do it, I did it. Not later, not when I felt like it, but now. Immediate action became my standard, because delay is fear's favorite strategy, and I was no longer available for delay. I moved fast. I moved clean. I moved with intention. That's what built momentum. Some people try to escape fear. I confronted it. I sat with it. I asked questions. I didn't suppress. I studied. And in that process, fear became information. It showed me where I was growing, where I still needed healing. And from that place, I didn't just move, I evolved. I used fear as a flashlight, not a cage. Your identity must rise above your emotion. I said, even when I feel fear, I'm still the kind of person who moves. That identity became a promise, a standard, and fear couldn't argue with it. When you know who you are, fear loses leverage. I didn't need to feel brave. I needed to remember who I had already decided to be. I became intentional with every choice. No more drifting, no more default settings. Every word I said, every step I took was chosen, designed, aligned. That level of awareness creates power, and in the presence of power, fear loses oxygen. I didn't just move, I moved with meaning. And meaning overpowers fear every time. Now type this in the comments. I lead with purpose, not fear. Say it as a reminder, as an anchor, because this is the new way forward. You don't react to fear anymore. You respond with direction. You don't shrink back. You rise. You don't doubt. You decide. That's who you are now. That's what makes you unstoppable. I built internal systems stronger than any storm. Morning reflection, clear intentions, evening review. These rituals weren't for performance, they were for protection. Because when fear knocks, systems answer. I didn't rely on willpower, I relied on structure, and that structure became the spine of my strength. I stopped saying, I'm stuck. I started saying, I'm learning. That one shift rewired my entire experience. Fear wants you to believe delay means failure, but delay often means refinement. I reframed every pause as preparation. I wasn't behind, I was becoming. And when you see becoming as progress, fear loses its grip. Every morning, I declared who I was, not based on how I felt, but based on who I chose to be. I am focused, I am disciplined, I am unshakable. These weren't hopes, they were decisions, and when spoken repeatedly, decisions become identity. And once identity is set, fear can't interfere with who you've already decided to become. Fear is loud when your vision is unclear. So I returned to my vision daily. I wrote it, spoke it, visualized it. I built it into my nervous system. Fear can't survive in the presence of vivid purpose. So I made purpose louder, more vivid, more detailed. My future wasn't just an idea, it was a blueprint, and fear couldn't shake what I saw so clearly. When fear returned, I met it with posture, not arrogance, but alignment. Shoulders back, chin up, breath calm. I didn't just look unafraid, I became unafraid in the presence of posture. The body informs the mind, and when my body moved like I believed, my beliefs followed. That's how I taught myself to lead through energy. Fear hates movement. So I made it a rule. I don't pause when fear shows up. I proceed, especially then. The timing of courage isn't perfect. It's chosen. And I chose it, again and again, until courage became my reflex. Not because I had no fear, but because I had a mission too powerful to be delayed by it. Some people wait until they feel ready. I made the feeling irrelevant. Ready is a decision, not a sensation. And I decided to be ready every day. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had all the intention. And intention, backed by action, builds trust. And trust in self is the enemy of fear. Now write this in the comments. I trust myself more than I fear failure. That trust will build your path. That sentence will anchor your identity. You're not here to question your strength. You're here to express it. Let fear observe, but never participate. You've crossed a line now. There's no going back. I no longer made fear the enemy. I made it the messenger. It showed me where I hadn't yet grown, where I still needed clarity, where I was hiding from myself. But once I listened with purpose, I acted with power. Fear didn't paralyze me anymore. It pointed me forward. That's how I took back control of my emotional landscape. You don't need to conquer fear with aggression. You conquer it with consistency. Quiet, focused, daily. It's not the shout that wins, it's the whisper that never stops. That's how I won. I whispered truth to myself every day until it became louder than the doubt. And when truth becomes your background noise, fear fades. I stopped chasing perfection. That was fear's game, delaying action under the disguise of standards. But I realized progress creates peace. Progress quiets the fear. And progress only happens through action. So I moved. Imperfect, unpolished, but in motion. And that motion created more confidence than waiting ever could. I built a new story. One where I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the one who hesitated. I was the one who chose, who created, who carried vision in the face of resistance. And I told that story until it became real. Until my life matched the narrative I repeated. That's how you destroy fear. You narrate a future where it no longer fits. Your nervous system remembers repetition. So I repeated movement, repeated action, repeated power, until it felt natural, until hesitation felt foreign. I didn't need hype, I needed habit. And once that habit took root, fear no longer had room to grow. I had planted too much truth for fear to find space. Fear thrives in ambiguity. So I got specific. What am I afraid of? Why? What's the worst that can happen? And then, what's the best that can happen? That clarity dissolved fear. Because clarity brings perspective, and perspective brings peace. I didn't ignore fear. I exposed it. And exposure removes its power. There's nothing wrong with feeling fear. What matters is how long you stay there. I stopped building homes in fear. I passed through it like a traveler, observing, learning, but never settling. That's the secret. Keep walking. Don't pitch a tent in what you were meant to pass through. Motion is the medicine. Now pause and type in the comments. I walk through fear. I don't live in it. Let that truth lead your next step. You're not the same person who started this journey. You've shifted. You've seen the script. And now you're the one rewriting it. The fear may remain, but it no longer has a home in you. I realized that fear doesn't stop when you succeed. It just changes form. Now it says, don't lose what you've built. But I don't build from fear. I build from faith. I maintain from purpose. I expand with intention. Success doesn't silence fear unless you keep choosing courage. And I've made that choice permanent. I don't negotiate with limitation. When I feel it rise, I speak louder. I move stronger. I re-anchor to truth. Because fear will always test your foundation. That's its role. But once your foundation is built on truth, not emotion, you don't shake. You rise. I stopped asking if I could. I started acting like I already had. Your greatest version lives on the other side of resistance. Not because fear disappears, but because you stop giving it leadership. I became the leader of my own life, my thoughts, my patterns, my voice. And from that place, I created. Fear became feedback, not a fortress, and I moved through it with authority. Silence became my superpower. In the quiet, I found my clarity. I didn't need more noise. I needed more presence. I slowed down, not to stop, but to hear, to choose. And in that choosing, I destroyed the autopilot that fear had programmed in me. You don't need more speed. You need more alignment. That's where fear loses. I live by decisions now. Not feelings, not fear, not opinions, decisions. Anchored in who I've become. That standard clears the path. I don't need the absence of fear. I need the presence of choice. And when I live by that, I'm untouchable. Not perfect, but powerful. Fear doesn't own those who have already decided. I don't wait to feel powerful. I act as though I already am. That action becomes the bridge between who I was and who I'm becoming. Fear may visit, but it no longer stays. It can't live where action leads. So I walk, I move, I declare. I live as the version I once feared to become. And that version is now home. When I look back, I don't regret the fear I felt. I regret the time I gave it, the time I waited, the dreams I delayed. But I transformed that regret into fuel, into vision, into urgency. And now I move with speed, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Because time is precious, and fear no longer gets a piece of it. Now type this in the comments. I've taken the lead. That phrase isn't just motivational, it's directional. You've reclaimed the wheel, you've ended the delay, you've stepped into identity. From here forward, fear isn't your compass, vision is. And with that shift, everything changes. Because now, you lead. I began to see myself differently. Not as someone working toward courage, but as someone who already walked in it. That mental image became my anchor. I pictured the version of me who no longer second-guessed, who moved fast, spoke clearly, chose boldly. And the more I imagined that person, the more I lived like him. Fear tried to remind me of my past, but I reminded it of my future, the future I chose, designed, built. One word at a time, one step at a time. Fear only has power when you forget who you're becoming. So I didn't just remember, I rehearsed it. I spoke from the future, lived from the future, moved like the future was already here. I made a rule. No more inner arguments. Fear doesn't get a platform in my mind. When it speaks, I don't engage, I execute. I don't get drawn into spirals. I get focused. There's peace in that clarity, power in that decision. It's not about overpowering fear, it's about starving it. And I've removed its last meal, hesitation. Every day, I choose the version of me that fear wanted to hide. I choose the voice, the movement, the posture. Not because I always feel strong, but because I've decided to act strong. Over time, that act became real. That repetition became rhythm. And rhythm rewrote my identity. I am no longer someone fear recognizes. I gave up the need to be understood. Fear loves approval. But I chose authenticity. And authenticity walks alone sometimes. But it walks in truth. And truth is louder than fear. So I stopped seeking permission. I gave myself authority. I walked away from the crowd and toward the calling. That's where power lives. When I look at fear now, I don't run. I nod. I smile. I walk past it because I know what's on the other side. I've lived there, built there, succeeded there. Fear doesn't stop me. It signals that I'm still growing, still stretching, still becoming. And if I'm still becoming, then I'm still aligned. And that's all I need. Let this truth echo. Fear dies where movement begins. You don't need louder motivation. You need aligned direction. You need reminders of who you are. Daily, repeated, spoken with certainty. You're not running from anything. You're rising toward everything. The version of you that leads isn't coming. He's here. Now, one final time, type in the comments. I lead, fear follows. Let that sentence become your identity, your standard, your rhythm. You have crossed the threshold. You are no longer led by fear. You lead it. And soon you'll look back and realize fear never stood a chance against someone like you.